Due to some recent theatrics brought to you by your own federal government, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about what the warning signs of an eventual tyrannical takeover might look like, and to tell you why I'm still prepping for that eventuality in the future due to the fact that a lot of things seem to be lining up the way they have in the past. And all we have to do is look back into recent history to see how close we are to that eventuality, and to understand that some things have already happened that emulate what happened back then, and we can also look at what happened back then to see the additional warning signs that will tell us exactly where we stand when it comes to that situation. Okay, so what happened back in the, 1930s when things were getting really bad over in Germany? Well, understand that there was a certain group of people who were being persecuted specifically based on things related to their race. And the Jewish people that lived in Germany had to deal with a lot of very negative things before World War II ever started. So we're going to talk about what happened in Germany during 1933 to 1938, because the invasion of Poland occurred in 1939. So this is all before a global conflict really took off. So understand why this kind of makes sense to talk about it right now based on what we're witnessing here in the United States as well as in other parts of the world, okay? So what occurred back then and what were Jewish people being victimized with by Germans at the time, to kind of give you an idea of what another group of people might experience if they were considered to be the problem of a tyrannical regime, right? If somebody decided that these people are actually the main problem within the country, and that if we were just able to, make life extremely difficult for them and then eventually maybe get rid of them, everything would be a lot better. So let's look at what happened, because we might be able to see some similarities going on right now that might help us better prepare for what we should expect down the road. And to be honest with you, I don't want any of this to happen, and I don't want any of these similarities to occur. And yet they already are, so there's not much I can do to change that, but we can prepare better for it if we understand that that likelihood is continually growing. Okay, so back then, we'll just go down a chain of different events that occurred. I'll tell you about some things that are happening right now that relate to them, and I'll let you make up your own mind as to what kind of path we're currently on. Burning of books by Jewish people was encouraged, and in fact, what they did back then, okay? So anyone that was Jewish, their literature was burnt, and anyone who was resistant to the ideas of mainstream German politics at the time were also burned. So all those books were burned. Now, we can align that to what's happening right now in the sense of censorship, right? Any opinion that's out there that somebody doesn't agree with, especially somebody who might be in line with the majority voice, and when I say that, I don't mean the actual majority of people, I mean the majority of shareholders, aka social media giants, the tech giants, and the government itself. If anybody goes against that grain, they're often censored or removed from platforms, or they're no longer able to speak their opinion, which is very much similar to book burning, which happened back then. And what I'm telling you is that back then, they specifically burned books that were by those people. It wasn't just all books. They weren't going straight up medieval to where reading was a sin. They were literally just saying, these people's books are bad and we got to get rid of them. Okay, now you can see the modern correlation. Let's move on. Okay. There was random attacks on Jewish people as well as on Jewish property, okay? So people who had a certain race or ethnicity, as well as people who would maybe nowadays have a certain ideology, have been attacked randomly often. And we have seen a lot of these things occur, especially when it comes to political rallies, and generally these attacks are coming usually from a particular side of the argument. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that I'm one way or the other when it comes to politics. I'm telling you what I'm witnessing and then explaining to you why we should be concerned about the path we're on. No matter which side of the aisle you or I are on, we as Americans should be very concerned about this, because we're being played and we're also being marched towards a very dangerous path. But back then, these random attacks put people on edge, and it let those people know that they were no longer welcome. And I think we've seen some of this when it comes to certain campaign offices, when it comes to certain healthcare providers, when it comes to political events in general. We know what's happening out there. We know people are being targeted. Imagine the amount of people who have gone out to eat recently that might be affiliated with a certain side of the aisle, or might be a judge in a court or something along those lines, who are interrupted or possibly even berated to the point of having to leave due to the fact that they've suddenly encountered a hostile environment. Now, along those same lines, back then they were also boycotting Jewish shops and businesses, saying that basically if you're German, you don't shop at Jewish businesses and you don't patronize them either because we don't want to give them our money, right? And we already see that happening here in 2022 when it comes to, I don't know, gun stores. And it's not done the same way. Understand that social media and the internet definitely control a lot of this more so than just actual brick and mortar shopping does. But what's happening now is it's financial rather than being on the ground level, right? So back then, the best thing they could do is say, look, let's just not shop there, right? We don't want them to earn money. We want to make their lives difficult. Well, now what they're doing is saying, well, hey, we're just not going to finance that kind of business. We're not going to help those types of businesses with any banking needs they might have. We might not allow them to use our network of payment communications in order to make business more streamlined, right? So that you can see how this is still applying, but it's just being done in a more technological way because it's just how things work, right? Now we see what's happening, and we also see what's happening in the courts to certain businesses who decide to do things a certain way based on religious beliefs or whatever else it might be, and then they're punished for it, and then they're even if they are found to be correct, they are ruined financially due to those court proceedings. And not to mention the amount of time they had to take away from their business just to be in court hearings. So understand how all this works. Even if they win in court, most of the time it ends up as a loss either way. So you can see how that's kind of happening these days, I'm sure. They also would not allow Jews to be in military service. They were excluded from it. Interesting, right? They wouldn't let Jews into the military because, it really wouldn't fit with what their doctrine was, or I don't know, maybe what their mandate was when it came to who was able to serve and who wasn't. It's almost like there was a group of people who they didn't see fit to serve any longer due to the fact that they didn't have some kind of biological situation that was similar to somebody else's. It's like they wanted to remove them from service due to the fact that they couldn't, necessarily control what was in or not inside their body. I'll let you figure that one out, but I'm pretty sure we're seeing a lot of that happen. Just ask the National Guard as well as all the other military branches about how many people have recently been let go and how many people they're struggling to recruit right now. I'm just throwing it out there, but that was one of the things they did. Jews can't serve in the military. Okay, well, look what's happening right now in our own military. I don't know. You tell me. Now, other things that started happening that might be more indicative of us getting much, much closer to that boiling point, right? And a lot of people will look back in history and they'll say, well, how did they let this happen? Like, how did they let these things occur to the point where they were eventually taken into those terrible places that they were taken to? Well, what you have to understand is that this is all happening slowly, right? And it's death by 1,000 cuts. Things are happening one piece at a time to where by the end of it, when you realize, oh my gosh, we've been thrown into the fire, right? It's a boiling point. Well, it's too late. You've already lost everything and you've lost all your drive to do anything about it, not to mention all of your resources. So keep that in mind while we go through this process, okay? Now, they also took away the ability for Jews to vote and also made them no longer considered citizens, right? Now imagine that. Imagine if there was a way you could make it so that certain people weren't allowed to vote in elections based on certain reasons. I mean, we already do that to, what, our felons here in this country? Now, I'm sorry, but once a felon has served their time, right, they've done their service to society based on what our current, Department of Justice dictates, well, at that point in time, why should they not have their rights reinstated? I mean, I don't know. You tell me, but I would assume that once you pay your dues, you are now paid up. Anyway, moving on from that, keep in mind how easy it is to take away voting rights. That's just how quick it can happen. And how many people that may or may not have participated in, I don't know, like some kind of like crazy protest or whatever you want to call it, that probably don't have the right to vote any longer? I don't know. Just throwing it out there. Now, what else happened back then? Well, Jewish families lost government benefits. Now, that's a big one. Now, understand, you might not like welfare. You might not like the idea of a free ride or whatever else you want to call it. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there who need assistance. And regardless of how you feel about it, they probably need it or else they'd be in a very bad situation. And some things you have to consider, especially from the mind of a prepper, is that if those people didn't have that, how would they get the things that they need? And that might even be a more dangerous situation than paying taxes for those people to have those basic necessities. Just throwing that out there, but understand that those people were removed in Germany from those benefits because they no longer fit the bill. And now, could you imagine how easy it would be to separate people by political class based on how they vote, and then just say, well, these people no longer qualify for benefits because they didn't do X, Y, or Z. Now, you don't have to necessarily say, well, how did this person vote? But you can usually tell how somebody leans when it comes to their ideology based on certain actions or activities they may or may not have taken. And there's a lot of things that people seem to be forcing upon others lately that could maybe exclude your ability to be able to go into a voting booth and actually vote. I'm trying to say these things in a way that you can understand without having to say everything blatantly openly, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to think about these things and discuss them without being overly public at times. It's just the way things work right now in this world, and you have to understand that this message is more important than me laying it out in layman's terms for everybody, right? Okay, now, what else happened back then that we should watch out for? Well, Jews were banned from parks, restaurants, and from swimming pools, right? And we've all seen that happen in the United States in the past as well. So I'm not trying to say that those things have not occurred here. But what we should understand is that this was all in the rev up towards a global conflict. And this was all in the rev up for a tyrannical takeover. And this was all happening to a certain type of person, right? And we all know what the divide looks like right now in this country, especially based on recent theatrics from our own federal government. So because of that, we have to look at what happened at the worst time of our history, at least in recent times, and say, okay, this was a very bad time, especially for the entire world. And what happened? Okay, why is that happening again? Well, you tell me. So if you see these things happening, it's a good warning sign. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that some of those things have already happened. Certain people are, not welcome at certain places. We know that for a fact. Whether or not it's been spoken or posted is a different story, but we also know that that is existent as of right now. And I'm not saying that's only on one side of the argument. I'm just saying in general that these are warning signs we have to watch out for. Now, what else happened? Jewish children were expelled from schools, right? They weren't allowed to go to German schools anymore. There's a lot of weird things happening with our schools right now. There's a lot of interesting concepts surrounding school boards, and there's a lot of interesting rhetoric coming from school boards about concerned parents and about their role in their child's education. I think that's enough, right? Okay, now moving on from there, Jews had their passports stamped with a red J, okay, to mark who they were when they were traveling so that they could be tracked, basically, or their passports were actually taken from them so they could not leave. There's been a lot of things surrounding the idea of travel over the last couple of years that could definitely show you how that could turn out, right? There are things that would or would not allow you to travel more easily based on certain statuses that we all hold. All I'm trying to do here is line some things up from you from a recent historic event that was terrible and was a tragedy of humanity, but it happened. And we can learn from it and become better people by studying it. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of those things repeat themselves, right? But we're not quite there yet. Are we on our way? Well, that's something that you should think about because these things are really happening, okay? And I'm very concerned about it because of what we've recently seen here in this country and what we've been seeing for quite some time now. So be prepared for this inevitability at some point in time. Look, a tyrannical takeover might not be next year. It might not be 2024. It might not be 2030, right? But I think based on the trajectory of humanity and based on the fact that we know people love their power, we will eventually see a tyrannical takeover, even if it doesn't become blatantly obvious at the time. So we have to be prepared for it. You got to be self-sufficient. You can't rely on the government. And you have to be prepared to defend yourself and protect yourself because you never know what those types of tyrannical organizations are willing to do, especially if you don't fall in line. And that's why I prepare for it because honestly, look at history. That's all you have to do. It tells you everything you need to know. Really, it honestly does. And right now it's telling us that we should be concerned about some of the things that we're hearing from our own government and some of the things that we're seeing from our own government. And when we have rogue government agencies going around trying to enforce things that aren't laws and then trying to threaten people with prison time, showing up at their front doors, telling them that what they have is illegal when in fact it is not, well, those are tactics of a secret police. This is not how the United States of America is supposed to work. This is not how the Fourth Amendment is supposed to work. This is not how anything is supposed to work. So you should be concerned. And if things get really bad, you might have to actually defend yourself because we know what happened post-1938. We know what happened during the 1930s. We know what happened to the Jewish people in Germany after a certain point. So why would we assume that something like that could never happen again? It's naive to think that people don't crave that kind of power still to this day, okay? So don't let political lines divide you. Understand that as Americans, we really need to get it together and stop blaming each other for our problems, because at the end of the day, it's their fault. The people who are in charge, okay? And look, it's not just who's in charge right now. It's the government in a way. No matter what year it is, and no matter what president we have, and no matter who's in charge, the government has people who are there all the time, okay? And those are the ones who are doing things that are not good for you or me. So do what you can to prepare for it. And understand that that time may come, and I hope it never does. But if it does, you better have prepped for it appropriately, let's just say. Without anything else to say about it, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.